anyways, it's a great honor to have Dr. Shimon here today. He's going to speak. The title of his talk, actually, if anybody wants to move closer, you're very welcome. There's going to be a wealth shower today. You want to move closer? So today,
that's true, actually.
okay, so today Shimon is going to speak. The title of his talk is called From Durban to Durban, Identity Theft and Generic Hatred. Shimon Samuels is the Director of the International Relations of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and he's based in Paris. He's responsible for issues of contemporary racism and anti-Semitism in Europe, South America, as well as international organizations including the United Nations, UNESCO, the OSCE, and the Council of Europe. He's been involved in containing or dealing with the resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe and the former Soviet Union. He just came back from Russia. Issues of restitution claims against banks and insurance companies from the Holocaust. Challenging the Vatican through diplomacy and countering the NGO incitement to within international venues to anti-Semitism and Israel bashing. Dr. Samuels has been a lecturer of international politics at the Colegio de Mexico, Sofia University in Tokyo, the Pennsylvania Military College, and Bar-Ilan University in Israel. In Jerusalem, he used to be the representative for the American Jewish Committee. He was the former director of the ADL and B'nai B'rith in Europe. He's worked as a researcher at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, and was the deputy director of the Leonard Davis Institute for International Relations in Jerusalem. He studied politics at Hebrew University. He did a master's at the London School of Economics and International Relations, and then went on to do a combined doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania and in Paris' Sorbonne in South American or Latin American studies, and he also has a diploma in Holocaust studies from Yad Vashem. And I'll just say on a personal note, with all these amazing qualifications, I first heard Shimon speak at the Global Forum on Anti-Semitism last year, and he spoke about anti-Semitism within the NGO context, and I think you kind of blew the place away. That Shimon really understands the context in which all of this is happening through NGOs and international organizations, how Israel is being demonized and marginalized at a very, I think, alarming rate. And he really has, through his experience, understands the players and what's happening and the international laws and regulations, which are very complicated. So it's very great that you're here to explain all of this to us.
First, my thank you to Charles Small and his colleagues at the Institute here for this kind of invitation. I wanted to show a very short extract of 6 minutes of film that we produced at the World Social Forum in Brazil, because I thought it would illustrate what I call the propagation of the Durban module in the inter-Durban period between 2001 and 2009. I'd like to focus on Western Europe because that's where I spend much of my time. An area which is still obsessed with the guilt of its two greatest crimes, colonialism and the Holocaust, and that burden has been expiated by a very simple mechanism, a projection or role reversal, which began in 1982 with the Western media's use of Holocaust language to describe the Israeli retaliation against Palestinian terrorist rockets from southern Lebanon and in Israel. West Beirut was called in the Western press, regardless of right or left, the Warsaw Ghetto. Southern Lebanon was the Sudetenland. They spoke of Israeli Luftwaffe, pogroms of Palestinians, etc. And it was perhaps summed up best by a caricaturist treatment of the famous photo of the surrender of the Warsaw Ghetto. You have all seen it. The child's arms are raised, facing the Nazis' guns. The cartoonist placed a keffiyeh on the Jewish child's head and stars of David on the Nazis' helmets. And voila, in 2 strokes, a subliminal role reversal. The Palestinian victim native was Judaized, the Israeli settler colonialist as the perpetrator Nazified. By such a simple relief mechanism, the citizens of the Nazi collaborator and occupied countries could now sigh, we were not so bad.
We have the video.
Okay, it's gonna work now.
Oh.
You wanna show it now or later?
Well, I don't know, you.
So,
I would prefer that.
Okay.
So, thank you for driving. Abraham Joshua Heschel.
You want the lights on?
Yeah. Abraham Joshua Heschel. You want the lights on?
On?
Thank you. Abraham Joshua Heschel was quoted as saying that Auschwitz was built not with bricks or stones, but with words. I was brought up in England with the children's ditty that sticks and stones can break our bones, but words can never hurt you. Which was so wrong, we now know that words can kill. And this type of Holocaust language eroded the protective Teflon against blatant anti-Semitic expression among the post-Holocaust generation. And it can be correlated in the period 1980 to 82 with 73 shootings and bombings of Jewish targets across Western Europe, 29 of those in France. Some of you may recall the bombing of the Kopernik synagogue in 1980 that ended in 82 with the so-called Goldenberg's massacre in the Budapest camps. A byproduct of Israel's entry into the Lebanon, I believe, ended that war. It was the dispersal and flight of European terrorists who were being trained in PLO camps in the southern Lebanon. Once they were repatriated, their targets at home were no longer exclusively synagogues or Jewish schools. They above all needed money. So they attacked banks, and they attacked embassies and NATO installations. And as a result, the authorities cracked down. France, Germany, and Italy destroyed Action Directe, or Baader-Meinhof Raaf, and the Red Brigades. Simon Wiesenthal's aphorism is demonstrated here. What starts with the Jews eventually and inevitably menaces the human condition. Fast forward a quarter century. We stood before the millennium, the year 2000, where there were roaring stock markets and peace processes marked the human condition. So think back only 9 years. The Jewish condition seemed almost messianic. We believed in our return to the family of nations, from a people that dwells alone, excluded and ghettoized, Am Levadat Yishkon, to emerge as Oblogoyim, a light unto the nations. But these illusions of normalization, the Comity of Nations, were splintered with the Intifada, Durban 2001, or the United Nations World Conference Against Racism, to give it its true name, and a new threshold in post-Holocaust anti-Semitism, a new global threat to both the Jewish and the global condition, which was a radical jihadist totalitarianism with a terror nexus, and it was marked 72 hours after the end of Durban 1 by 9/11. I was the only Jew to be elected to the NGO Forum International Steering Committee of the Durban Conference. As such, I had the doubtful pleasure of participating in all of the preparatory committees, or prepcoms in the jargon, over the preceding 2 years in Geneva, Strasbourg, Santiago, Warsaw, where we worked on the documents on Holocaust education, Holocaust denial, for Durban. But I was denied a visa for the last of those prepcoms, which took place in Tehran. And there the wheels fell off. We arrived in Durban to find ourselves the victims of what I call an Orwellian identity theft. In new mathematics, recounted the 3 Holocausts: European responsibility to Africa for slavery, the transatlantic slave trade to the United States, the Americas, and the Palestinian Nakba or catastrophe. There was no Jewish Holocaust. After the 3 Holocausts came the 2 anti-Semitisms. According to a Tehran University professor, pre-1945 hatred for the Jew, especially stereotyped as the subversive communist or the thieving capitalist, now ended with the 1948 triumph of Zionism. Anti-Semitism shifted and became the hatred for the other Semite, The hook-nosed Jews was replaced by the hook-nosed Arab, especially stereotyped as petrol sheiks or terrorists. So anti-Semitism now became a form of Arabophobia, and consequentially Zionism became a form of anti-Semitism. The Friday night march against racism during Durban was due to end at City Hall, but it didn't. It stopped around the tiny Jewish club. And I remember the banners of Mein Kampf declaring Hitler was right. And that night, for those of us who were there, the fine distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism was unambiguously blurred. Well, I was expelled from the International Steering Committee. I was called the World Jew, but I was still invited to attend the final session 3 months after Durban on the 6th of December 2001 in Geneva. And there was circulated a 10-year program distilled from the NGO Durban Plan of Action, which had been rejected by the High Commissioner for Human Rights as racist, but it was now presented as a route map for Durban 2. The first part was an 8-point plan to isolate Israel as the last bastion of apartheid. It was modeled on the campaign against apartheid South Africa, which is called the Sullivan Program, of the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. And the 8 points, very quickly. The first were educational programs on Israeli racism. The second were legal suits against Israelis, particularly tourists in countries of universal jurisprudence, for crimes against humanity and war crimes. The third was the delegitimization of the Zionist law of return for Jews. And the fourth, its replacement by a law of return for all Palestinian refugees, not only 67, but also 48. Fifth was a renewed economic boycott. 6, sports, telecommunications, academic, scientific, cultural, and tourism embargoes. 7, the rupture of diplomatic relations. And 8, measures against those states or NGOs that refused to comply. And all of these steps were to involve the churches, universities, media, especially the internet, trade unions, NGOs, and all United Nations agencies. Does it sound familiar? It's exactly the incremental path of the Durban Protocols over the last 7 years. This plan focused on the not only the little devil Israel, but the great Satan, the United States, for its crimes of globalization and the campaign for reparations for the slavery Holocaust in America. This 8-point plan was rendered an orphan, as each member of the committee denied paternity, and we couldn't find a DNA. But it became what I would call the Durban module, and found continuity in the anti-globalization movement, the World Social Forum born in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 2002, the film we wanted to show you. In the stadium, I sat among 70,000 young people from 126 countries, screaming "Viva la Intifada Global," waving banners intriguingly declaring, "Nazis, Yankees, Jews, no more chosen peoples." Whatever that means. From its satellite, the European Social Forum, which meets every year in a European country, I remember in Saint-Denis, Paris, in 2005, came the arsonists of a Jewish school in nearby Drancy, ironically the deportation way station to Auschwitz. The European Social of 2006 met in Athens, where Greek neo-Nazis distributed their journal, Golden Dawn, and it was devoted to the Arab-Nazi partnership under Hitler and the need for their contemporary solidarity against the international Jew. The 2007 was in London, and the 2008 took place in Malmö, Sweden, which was sharply radicalized by that city's heavy jihadist influence. Only yesterday, there was a pro-Israel rally in Malmö, which was firebombed. A mantra born in Durban was BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, okay, a campaign against the state of Israel. And here the language is strikingly reminiscent. BDS parallels Hitler's Kauf nicht bei Juden, do not buy from Jews. Nakba echoes, die Juden sind unser Unglück, the Jews are our misfortune. Durban thus persists, but the scars will reopen at the 2007 CRAPCON in Geneva for the preparation of the Durban Review Conference, which is taking place 20 to 24 April of this year. There was also a parallel session in the European Parliament in Brussels of the United Nations Committee for the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. That's a mouthful. In both of those fora, the identity theft numbers game continued. The two anti-Semitisms of Durban 2001 have reverted to only one. The Libyan chair in Geneva declared that, quote, since 2001, there has been a growth in anti-Semitism against Muslims. The three Holocausts were now one. A Palestine Solidarity Committee spokesman announced in Brussels that 15 May 2008 was not to be Israel's 60th Independence Day, it is the day of the Nakba Holocaust, which would be launched at the World Social Forum's Day of Global Action in January 2008, and it was. Some more maths. 40 years of apartheid occupation had come to an end. It was now replaced with a new campaign of 60 years of colonial occupation, launched on 29 November Palestine Day 2007. Some speakers even tried to slip in 90 years of Zionist colonialism since the Balfour Declaration. For further numbers, the lip service at Durban 1 was still to two states living side by side. This was made irrelevant in Brussels by a Palestine Authority minister, Mustafa Barghouti. A one-state solution is now necessary, but without apartheid in that state. Well, how does that read? Judenrein, Israel, or ethnically cleansed the Jews? So whether the Holocaust, or apartheid, or anti-Semitism, the misrepresentation of one people's victimology by egregious misappropriation to another is identity theft. And its aim is to revive the 1975 formula that Zionism equals racism. This was repealed by the General Assembly in 1994. Now it's been extended by Durban 2001, where the Jew was deprived of his status as a victim of racism and is made into the perpetrator. The language and imagery of the Durban module are compounded by Middle East blowback, through the internet and Arab satellite television, to the young generation of the Muslim diaspora in Europe. They feel rejected by, and in turn reject, their host society. Many of them are unemployed and live in slum tenements on the peripheries of French, British, and German cities. They live cheek by jowl with working class or elderly North African Jews in the Paris suburbs. Their cowboys are the Palestinians. Their Indians, their Jewish neighbors, the most vulnerable and closest to a displaced intifada. I've more recently called that displaced intifada the nests of Gaza. What had begun as the baggage of European anti-Semitism in the form of a neo-colonial export to the Arab-Muslim world in the 19th century, 20th century, has been reprocessed as a re-import through the Muslim diasporas in Europe back to the old continent. The result? What had begun as an anti-Zionist political function of the Arab-Israeli conflict between secularists about real estate is becoming a much more dangerous metaphysical, cosmological, Muslim-Jewish zero-sum confrontation in which compromise is unthinkable. At the same time, there is also a parallel shift from all that is Jewish is evil to the more universal, all that is evil is Jewish. The embrace of the medieval bloodline, the world domination, conspiracy of the protocols of Zion seems to be an obsessive compulsive disorder. And latterly, Holocaust denial are endorsed by Salafist imams who abuse the name of Islam by distorted interpretations of Hadith. These canards are replete in the Sunnah Hamas Charter. They're matched by the Shia Hezbollah's contentions that Judaism and Islam are irreconcilable. The anti-Semitism terrorism nexus became a reality with the Hezbollah Iranian implication in the 1994 Buenos Aires Jewish Community Center bombing, the synagogue bombings in Istanbul and Djerba, the execution of Wall Street correspondent Daniel Pearl as a Jew in Pakistan, and the redemption of suicide by radical mullahs as the military warfare of holy warrior mountains to gain a blessed life. It started first against Israelis, but what starts with the Jews, as we said, never ends with. While there's no international consensual definition of terrorism, there's a growing number of countries, including most Muslim states, that are victims of suicide terrorism. So the hop, the skip, and the jump to terrorism was to be served by the first Arab Islamic Congress in Europe in October 2004 in Berlin. Its website unambiguously announced fundraising and recruitment of young European-born Muslims to take up the sword in Iraq and Palestine. The then German Interior Minister, Otto Schily, responded to ours and Wiesenthal Centre's report by banning the gathering and repatriating the organizers back to Lebanon. Now, I'm a member of a European Union emanation, and I've been elected and re-elected to it 3 times. It is called the European Network Against Racism, ENA. It groups some 600 NGOs across the continent. A high percentage of the members are European Muslims, most of whom are on the front line against fundamentalism. A member of ENA France is a West African woman. Her children were converted to Islam in the tenement basement of their apartment block. They were converted by an illiterate imam from Algeria. Several of such black African converts were reportedly put to the test as true believers by the order to burn a synagogue or attack a Jewish school. Some of you may remember the Ilan Halimi murder by a group which had iconized Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. Well, this French Gabonese lady continued. Our boys were burning cars owned by whites, and my oldest came home and told his father. My husband said, I understand that you burned their cars. We were a poor family, but we had a car. Why did you burn our car? The boy responded, we do not need a car. We have no hope or future here. So I asked her, Madame, do you mean that your son could be a recruit to jihad? She replied, many of his classmates are now in Pakistan. When those European-born mujahideen, French, Maghrebin or Africans, British Pakistanis, German Turks return home, these nests of Gaza will hatch. And what began with the Jews will be a totally new security nightmare. Common to both anti-Semitism and terrorism is a motor driven by frustration, envy, rancor, fear of the new and the different, dubbed by political psychology as the liberating catharsis of hate. The psychologist Ant Bandura has called the behavior of the hate monger a moral disengagement, a loss of moral compass or deprogramming of conscience. We require instrumental deprogramming of hate for a moral re-engagement. And this can be illustrated, I believe, in an idealized approach to anti-racism engagement. Though it has been betrayed by the Durban module's reality, I still believe that we have to be present and we have to engage. And I'd like to suggest, visualize a football field with at one end all the victims of bigotry, discrimination, trust. At the other end of the field, all the litany of hate mongers. And the masses on the field and assembly are dispassionately neutral, indifferent, not even conscious bystanders. The 3 weeks of the war in Gaza was a pretext for a 300% increase in anti-Jewish incidents across Europe. Yet there were very few non-Jewish protests. I was invited to keynote a BBC World Service, World Have Your Say, and it was supposed to have been about those anti-Semitic incidents across Europe. My implications about those assaults meant an anti-Semitism of indifference, a total absence of empathy from the calling, from people who called him from all over the world. Each wave of Middle East-related anti-Semitism, 1982, 2000 to 2002, 2008, has set a new threshold, raising the bar of increasing indifference. Each threshold redefines the acceptability of targeting the Jewish citizen. Each is a new threshold, but it's based upon previous thresholds. The boycott of Jewish shops in Rome, the boycott of Jewish companies in Argentina. We know they are not new, but now, in this day, they set new thresholds. And I believe that there is a numbing effect at each threshold. This numbing effect was witnessed in reaction to Ahmadinejad's provocations as he probes Western reticence and timidity. When he made his statement, the Holocaust is a lie, it was met with outrage. Wipe Israel off the map was met with more muted protest. Jews are a tumor, virus, bacilli was met with Jew fatigue. But what starts with the Jews? The Simon Wiesenthal Center co-published with UNESCO an award-winning collection of essays entitled Anti-Semitism, the Generic Hatred, Essays in Memory of Simon Wiesenthal. This is the English edition. The French, the Russian, and the Spanish all have tributes to the memory of Isental from intellectuals, political leaders from each of those language zones. We hope very much that the next edition will be published in Arabic. The purpose of publishing it in Arabic with those Arab speakers or Muslims who are prepared to let their name be known. And the beauty of this book is that it includes three Muslims, an African, Roma Gypsy, representative of the disabled, who are applying the lessons of combating anti-Semitism to their own victimology. That's why it was called Generic Hatred. That's why it was of interest to UNESCO. Generic hatred is indivisible. It gives us a platform for solidarity with other NGOs. That is part of the political mortgage and the reason why I continue with Durban. Some would consider it a lost cause. Many Jewish organizations are talking about boycotting. With the defiance of the call of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, wir seien dort, we are here. We are here doesn't mean we are geographically here. It means we survive for a purpose. And that purpose is to be present. I recall a Human Rights Commission of the UN Special Conference on Religious Discrimination held in Madrid. I was present when the Syrian ambassador said that in this room there are present representatives of that racist faith who considers itself divinely elected. They should be expelled. I turned to my neighbor from a sister organization, Amnesty, a young lady, and I said to her, that's hate speech. I'm leaving. Will you accompany me? And she said, oh, I didn't hear anything. I suggested earwax. However, I made a lot of noise, demonstratively dropped my books, and stomped out. I waited for 3 minutes until His Excellency had finished speaking. I turned back and I reseated myself. Because there were not representatives of that racist faith there. There was only one, me. And if you leave the field abandoned, it will be occupied by the enemy. And that is not our job. Our job is to be there in order to indulge ourselves in that political process of mortgage building. George Mikesh, the Anglo-Hungarian humorist, a fugitive from Nazism, writes in How to Tango of the joy of hate, which is so satisfying. This great joy of the joyless, he says, by shifting the blame, acts to compensate for one's failure in the world and to convince the hater that he belongs to the elite. And Mikesh concludes by saying, any hater ultimately hates himself. And in this he is quite right. He's hateful enough. I wanted to end with something of a generic nature, generic hatred, because I believe that anti-Semitism can serve as a paradigm. And I will conclude with a poem that illustrates that liberating catharsis of hate, common to both anti-Semitism and to terrorism. It was written by a British Muslim teenager somewhere in the UK. You can find it on islamicaware.com. And I read it with great sorrow. Why do I feel so angry right now? Why is it that sometimes I feel like hate will spill out of my eyes and my ears, and my head and my gut and my feet, and my hands and my fingers and my soul, and my essence and my faith and my mind and my intelligence, and my stupidity and my tears and my laughter and my words and my poetry and my silence, and my actions and my inaction? Why is it that everything in me and around me and about me is hate? Why do I hate so much? What is it that causes this? Why the hell can't I locate it? Why does it feel so excruciating and painful? Why can't I grab it and hold it and shake it and strangle it and torture it and kill it and kill it? Where is it? And why can't I escape it? Thank you. Oh, yes, this one. Is it in English? Yeah, okay.
Bajo esa consigna, nació en Porto Alegre el Foro Social Mundial. Se presentó como una respuesta a la globalización neoliberal. Pretende ser un espacio para la construcción de una realidad más justa, una alternativa al discurso dominante. Sin embargo, allí se desarrollan conferencias y manifestaciones que ensalzan el terrorismo suicida y alimentan el antisemitismo. La reivindicación de la violencia, la deslegitimación de Israel y las proclamas antijudías son bien recibidas en el Foro Social Mundial.
Qual é a tua causa?
Nós retornamos a causa palestina aqui e a gente luta por uma Palestina laica. A gente luta contra Israel e contra todo o plano sionista de dominação mundial. Lutando por uma Palestina que não seja de los sionistas, que não seja del capitalismo, que sea tierra de un pueblo libre.
¿Qué opinas de los ataques suicidas?
Esa es la resistencia que hay contra el sionismo. Hay un terrorismo oficial y nadie hace nada contra Israel. No hay boicot de los productos de Israel, no hay nada. La ONU dice que no, que está errado, pero no. En la práctica no pasa nada.
¿Cuál es tu causa?
A causa de los hombres del mundo.
¿Cuál es?
Palestina, Irak, América Latina.
¿Armas al usón? ¿Con el conflicto?
Sí, por supuesto.
¿Cuál?
La guerra antiimperialista.
¿Y por la paz hay alguna solución con paz?
La paz, sí. La paz de los unitarios.
Apoya la guerra, los ataques suicidas.
Sí. Usted debe ser judío, no mínimo. Judío. Usted es judío. Es judío y culpable de la manifestación.
Israel!
pausa.
All those extras.
We'll have a Q&A session. I just want to start off by one question and a comment. When we were discussing things earlier, you mentioned in your lecture that you're a member of an NGO association in Europe with 600 NGO members and it's committed to issues of anti-racism. Could you tell the people here about how you were re-elected and who re-elected you and sort of the process that you were engaged in? And then the question would be, you mentioned that you want to participate in Durban too, and that NGOs should be present and fight the fight. Would you advocate the same for nations, or do you advocate that countries should boycott and people and NGOs should participate?
The last is the easiest. I can't speak for countries. My feeling is that the NGO movement against racism has been hijacked. It's been hijacked by a few what are called in the jargon of the UN gongos, governmental, non-governmental organizations. They, though marginal, are able to wield immense power by hijacking agendas. And what we do is attempt to empower the aggrieved. The year following Durban, the Durban module appeared in the World Summit against the World Summit for Sustainable Development, which was held in Johannesburg. That's an environmental meeting of the UN. And we wrote to every NGO that was participating, asking them only one thing: stick with your agenda. Biosphere, agriculture, water, etc. Do not allow yourselves to be hijacked. We got 26 replies from Africa to South America to Europe. And when we arrived in Johannesburg, we had a first meeting with that group of 26. I called them the Caucus of Integrity. And let's make a multiplier effect. And actually, we did, except for one attempt to exclude the Jewish National Fund, Keren Kayemet, the forestation organization, as a racist apartheid organization. That failed. It was a clean conference. Some of you may remember the name Sergio Vieira. He was a UN official who became the High Commissioner for Human Rights after Mary Robinson. We held a conference in 2003 at UNESCO on anti-Semitism, and he was our keynote speaker. I drove him to the airport. He went to Iraq and got killed. But Sergio Vieira, he understood the trauma of Durban, and he said to me, I will never use the word Durban, but there were some positive aspects to the Durban process, the production of the national action plans, which each country had to present, particularly European countries, on how to fight racism, for education, for police measures, etc. That's important. And to my surprise, after he passed away, he was killed, his assistant called me and said, look, he has left you a letter and an invitation. And in that letter, he said, there are 3 ways to hold the Durban implementation process, which is mandated by the UN and has a huge budget. It has 23 employees. One is to hold meetings of states. The second is to hold meetings of NGOs. Both are useless. The third is to hold meetings of experts. And the regional implementation process will be by experts. And he had left me an invitation to be one of those experts for the so-called Western European Other Group, the WEO, which was held in Brussels. And I was very moved by that. I attended the American implementation meeting in Mexico. It was 8 experts, and it was clear. So, had Vieira de Medio lived, I think that we would have seen a very different process of Durban. So now coming to Enau. Enau was born in 1997 when the European Union was preparing the Amsterdam Treaty and Article 13, which was the article against discrimination. And the EU called 800 representatives of anti-racist organizations to Brussels. At that meeting, they announced that there would be a committee or board of, it gave them an European Against Racism, 15 member states, 30 members, 2 from each, ideally 1 male, 1 female. And I raised my hand and I said there were many organizations here that have an affinity with more than one country. We're pan-European. I'd like 2 more seats on the board. They agreed, and I said, okay, then I present my candidate. A Pakistani woman from Britain said, no, the members of the board all have to be victims of racism. I said, what's anti-Semitism? No, that was an history. I said, define racism. Against colors or Muslims. So there was an outbreak of noise, particularly because the Roma were beginning to come in. And the chair said, okay, everybody out into the car, we have an hour. In that hour, I speak a little Arabic and started lobbying, and we came back in, and I was elected by the Arab migrant groups, which was actually quite flattering, but it served their needs also, because I could do things they couldn't for them. And just to give you an example, through Enau, I was involved in suspending an anti-Muslim Nazi radio in Copenhagen, Radio Holger, which was calling for the murder of Muslims. And as a result, got plaudits from Muslims around Europe. I got a phone call from somebody very active in Enau, a Pakistani from Denmark, who said, I'd like your help. We know that there is a newspaper that's going to publish a series of cartoons caricaturing Muhammad. We consider that to be blasphemy. Would you speak out for us? Because I had always spoken of reciprocity, collective defense in anti-racism. And I said, well, okay, but let's see. I mean, I know that newspaper, they used to have anti-Semitic cartoons also. But we have a problem. President Ahmadinejad has just said that the Holocaust is a lie. So my red line is reciprocity. I will speak out for you if you do the same for us. He said, give me 48 hours. 24 hours later, he called me and said, we can't do it, it's too dangerous. So I said, well, in that case, I can't. Either we'll find further projects in the future together. Very happy I didn't because of the way that issue evolved. However, I've been re-elected 3 times to that body. Through them, I was elected to the International Steering Committee of the Durban Conference. But today, unfortunately, Enau has been taken over by Islamists. When I say that, particular, it's still minority. And only last week I was at a meeting in Brussels where I was accused of feeding the Jewish-Muslim conflict because I spoke of the traumas of Durban. They are now very much involved in lobbying for an NGO forum, and we know what that means in Geneva. So, unfortunately, I believe that it's breaking down. Since the Intifada, 3 times we passed a resolution, joint resolution, stating that Jewish-Muslim solidarity is vital. Any fissures in that relationship can only serve the racists who would wish to target other communities. I don't know if that will pass today.
Any questions?
Your painting is very, very preliminary.
European leaders who are speaking out? Are there any organizations that are standing against trends that you are describing?
First of all, the nature of my work, I think, perhaps puts me within the European habitat, having a certain warped view of reality of a world divided between them and us. But on the other hand, I mean, that's tempered by the other side of the work which I try to describe, and that is using the shifting configuration of alliances. I didn't believe that there was a possibility based upon mutual interest. I don't think I would be able to continue the work. I mean, I think, for example, of a unique example in human history, and that is how normalization came so rapidly between the people of genocides, Germany, and the people who were their victims. From 1945 to 48. There was you wouldn't say reconciliation, but there was a rapprochement based upon mutual need. Germany for its image, the Jews for the survival of Israel. However, over the years, building on that base, there has been a true reconciliation. So, I don't agree that I'm totally pessimistic at all. I believe that there are possibilities, and yes, obviously we have our friends in Europe. The problem is that, number one, as I said, there's the numbing effect, and number two, there is the intimidation. I have been subject to what I call a case of juridical jihad over the past 3 years. I have been sued for defamation, which is a criminal offense in France, by a Franco-Palestinian organization, because I associated them with the financing of terror. This is exactly their status as designated by the United States, Australia, and Canada, which designates this group as terrorist. I was fined €1 symbolic. However, that was too expensive because on the jurisprudential basis of that, the Danish branch, which had been closed down, was reopened. I won at appeal. I was acquitted. They have now taken me only the day before yesterday to the Supreme Court of France. That can take another year, and it can become a career. I could write a book about it, but if I do, I'll get sued. So it's cost me so far about €120,000. I worked that out in dollars. Luckily, I have enough friends who believe in what I do that finance this, but it's a damn waste of money. We could be doing a lot better things with it.
In this country, we have maybe 25 minutes away from here, Norman Finkelstein speaking a little while ago at Central Connecticut State University.
Sorry, I don't hear you.
Norman Finkelstein was speaking at Central Connecticut State University, and he would be taking the opposite position. I'm a Jew, my parents were Holocaust survivors, and Israel is a Nazi state. And I would guess a university like that calls this part of peace studies, how would you say we should challenge that?
Okay. I'm probably one of the few practitioners, anti-Semitologists, I call them, who has actually debated Norman Finkelstein. I did it because I was tracked into it. I'd been invited 8 months before by a prominent synagogue in London, and about a week or two before the event, I was called and I was asked if I would share my podium with Norman Finkelstein. I said, no way, and they said, well, we're putting the ad in the papers, and if you don't show up, you'll be called a coward. And so I said, of course I can't do that. So I was there. And I think that it wasn't a terrible exercise because he came off as fifth rate. I think that it was a contemptuous performance. And basically, I said, Norman, I'd like to know how much you're getting for this trip, because welcome to the Holocaust industry. And he said, well, I'm not. In fact, I don't have enough money to get back to the United States. I need $200. And a little Jew in the back of the room got up and he said, He said, you call me after Shabbos, I'll be happy to give you more than $200. Just go home. But he said, I'm an adjunct professor, I earn $15,000 a year. I said, you can't be so good, because at the end of it, I said to the audience that there's a Hebrew writer, Chaim Nachman Bialik, who wrote a story called The Knock. Do you know the story? Now the shamus, the sexton, who every day knocks on every window pane to call them to the morning prayers, and one day the snow is so heavy that the last house where the man has never come, he just disregards. And that morning, that man is in shul. And he says to the shamus, why didn't you knock on my window pane? And he said, well, I have for years and you never come. He said, no, but I heard the knock. So I said, did Norman come to hear a knock? I doubt it. But, okay, I did it. I don't think it was well looked upon by most Jewish organizations to give him a platform, but he showed his shallowness as a result. What would I do if it happened at a major university, giving him some type of prestige, because this wasn't a major university, it was a synagogue. It was almost a controlled environment. I suppose I would protest, as I do when David Irving or Zundel Carrot or Farison is to appear at a European university. On the other hand, I would like to say that, I believe that protest, and I won't speak for my organization because organizations don't think this way, but I believe that protest is like money. Over-protesting devalues the currency. I think we have to be very careful, and sometimes we have to give third parties the possibility to speak out for us. Sometimes it is important for the Jewish voice to be heard, but we have to determine very carefully. And I'd like to give you one example of, in this country, the electronic church, so-called, the television churches in the south of the United States, Southern Baptist in the main. There was a pastor called Bailey Smith, I'm sure you remember him. He made a statement one Sunday morning on television that God does not understand, does not hear the prayers of the Jew. His ear is not so constructed. A little blasphemous, but still. And a lot of people were running around screaming, Gewalt, anti-Semitism. And I remember that we called him. He said, look, I'd like to come for lunch. We'd like to talk this one through. And he came, and he brought some of his board. And we said, did you intend to offend the Jewish people? And he said, no, I'm in a business. So we said, well, you offended the Jewish people. Have you ever visited the Holy Land? We call it Israel, we call it the Holy Land. Doesn't matter. He said, never. Okay. You come with some of your group, we'll take a rabbi, we'll join you, and we did. And at the shore of the Sea of Galilee, Great Canaan, he turned to our rabbi and he said, Rabbi, this is a very holy place for me. It would make me the happiest man in the world if you would allow me to baptize you. And our rabbi unflinchingly said, Pastor Smith, no problem. 5 minutes after you allow me to circumcise you. Now, what does this teach us? It teaches us, number one, that don't rush to judgment. I wouldn't invite a rabid Holocaust denier or Islamist terrorist to lunch. But if there's a chance that this is pure ignorance, then why not? And secondly, the power of that hand grenade called humor. Now, a little bit of humor can explode a situation. Did we need 8 million more enemies in the south of the United States? No. Never again did we have a problem with it. So I did that. I did that in Geneva, at the United Nations, with 2 journalists who had a long record of attacking Israel, and verging almost to talking about, this obsessive compulsive disorder about Jewish power control, the banks, etc. And I invited them for lunch in the delegates' lounge. And they passed me the wine list. I'm not a great winemaker, but I sort of did and the next 20 minutes, all they were doing was talking about this wine. We never discussed Israel. And since then, they've never written an anti-Israel comment again. So it can be the banal And I think that as part of this work, we cannot blanket the situation. We have to be very careful in defining who we're dealing with, and that is why, as I said, I go to these Durban meetings, which are not really agreeable, in order to try to build relationships, try to build some type of reciprocal link with people, and also to address their grievances. And I think we've forgotten that. The other side are very good at that. They have been able to universalize their approach and to feel empathy for other people's pain, but not allow them to speak about it. So we have to do it differently.
We had a discussion before already, because I'm not convinced about going to Durban. And what do you think about Pascal Bruckner? Because you come from Paris, and he is one of the outstanding French philosophers. Pascal Bruckner.
Can't hear you.
Pascal Bruckner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was saying half a year ago in several journals, well, we have to boycott Durban too. We have a political culture in Europe which is singling out Jews, and we cannot say, well, let's discuss with those NGOs and states if it's true to, or if it's a good thing to single out Jews or not. And in Germany and also in other countries, we have since then, since the beginning of last year, a kind of campaign boycott Durban too. I've been, as you have witnessed last year, at Neuer. Charles was also there in Geneva. We organized how to boycott it, and Canada is following this, and Majewski and others. And I think it's the first time since 1948 that at least some countries like Canada and maybe other countries will follow, like the Czech Republic, they see now, well, we cannot, it's not business as usual. We cannot talk with Holocaust deniers. There is a kind of red line, and they dropped this several times, not just once, but twice, several times. And so, for example, Finkelstein, I would never talk a single word with him. And for good reason. That's for good reason. It's not just stupid, it's not just embarrassing for myself talking with a person like this. But it's a kind of saying, well, he's acceptable. He can have an audience. And I think, like, I had a talk on this with Abby Foxman last year in Jerusalem at the ADL. There was an event where the ADL was talking, and I think he was at the same position. He was saying, we have the red line was written, was done so many times, especially by Iran, but also by other countries. And the NGOs are on the forefront. So I think it's really dangerous to participate in such events, because it says those people, those few people, I have some hundreds of friends of mine in Germany, for example. In other countries, there are some hundreds. We are talking about hundreds who are against anti-Zionism. Hundreds and thousands
Against what?
against anti-Zionism.
Against
anti-Zionism. Yeah, hundreds are against anti-Zionism. You know, so those people have big trouble if someone is saying, well, we have to go to Durban. They get in trouble.
I don't follow the logic. I'm sorry. If they are against anti-Zionism,
yeah,
they should come to Geneva. We need them there.
I tell you, but they just took the awareness the last 8 years that it is stupid to go there, because the mainstream in Geneva, because the mainstream in the world, the mainstream in the UN is against Israel. And Irving Kotler himself, he told at the rally against Ahmadinejad last September in New York City, I was there, it is a stupid thing even from the United States of America to allow a person like Ahmadinejad to come here. And it's definitely relating to law. It's stupid to say, well, he's a diplomat. He's not a diplomat. He's a president, and you can say he's not no wizard. That's not a problem, actually. So, yeah, and Kotler, and he's an outstanding person who has been fighting anti-Semitism, and he knows what he's talking about, dealing with the United Nations, and he says it's a stupid thing to allow those people to speak out. Just boycott them. And imagine what would happen if whole Western Europe, including North America, Japan, India, Australia, the good countries on this world, they say, we boycott it.
Yeah, Clemens, it's a great idea, and I have full respect for Irving Kotler. He's written in this book, and I was with him in Stockholm 2 weeks ago. But you're living in a cloud cuckoo land. None of those countries are going to walk out of Durban. It's a block system. Everything is a collective decision. The Czech Republic will not leave because they are the presidents. They have the presidency of the European Union, so they cannot leave. And
They could.
well, okay, this is speculative. I don't see it happening. What I do see is a situation where some Jewish organizations will prefer to be on the outside of the UN and demonstrating and having events on the outside of the UN. Others will be inside the UN, and they will be working And I think it's both legitimate, both of them. And the more, and as I think I said to you before, we fought that this meeting be held in Geneva, not in Durban, not in Tripoli, where the Libyans were happy to host it, but it should be in Geneva where it's controllable, where whatever happens within the UN is controllable because they have their own policing, and if it happens in the streets of Geneva with agitators that smash up Geneva, fine, happy.
No, it's funny because in Germany the debate is it's the other side round. In Germany, a lot of NGOs say it's great. It's in Switzerland. We can go there. Thousands of people they like to join it because they couldn't go to South Africa last time.
Okay, the last meeting I had with a group of NGOs, this was in Brazil, they blamed me for the fact that they're not getting the funding to come to Geneva. So on the one hand, I was saying, oh, me, I can't say that. But on the other hand, I felt a great sense of satisfaction. So this will take place in Geneva. Geneva is a sentence of brain death for every journalist who is posted to Geneva. Nothing happens in Geneva. Believe me, this event will be fun for those journalists. It's the easiest place to organize a press conference, and every Jewish organization will be organizing press conferences. So it will give them, the journalists, something to do, and I think that you may say that we don't stand much of a chance. We'll see. It's a different philosophical approach. Maybe my own organization will not agree with me totally. A very interesting thing is happening with the major organizations, where you have organizations with their headquarters in New York, however, their European branch is going. The European branch has decided to go. They are in Europe, it's close to Geneva, so this is going to be an interesting exercise for the whole question of Jewish solidarity.
One last question.
I was wondering about what you were saying about how people should, as I understood you, how people should, from different communities, apparently support each other. The example you gave with this person from Denmark. And I was wondering, it sounded very much like a very communitarian approach. So how does that, in your view, how does that work for people who wouldn't agree with that or wouldn't see themselves as part of a community? And
It's not just a communitarian approach. I mean, I gave another example, and that is the World Economic Forum, the Davos Group. They have something called the C100, which is 50 Muslims and 50 non-Muslims of the West in dialogue with the Islamic world. And I was responsible for bringing an internet dimension. And I made a deal with them. I said, it's a package. You buy it intact or nothing. And it was 3 threads. One were Islamophobic sites, they were thrown. And there are Islamophobic sites that go into the mainstream. Let's not deny it. And the second are sites which in the name of Islam, they spread anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, glorification of terror. They were not so happy with that. And I presented it in Jordan, the Dead Sea. And the third is ijtihad, the internal anguish within Islam facing the challenges of modernization. And here, Prince Turki al-Faisal of Saudi Arabia, Sirak al-Din, the director of the Alexandria Library, came to me and said, you've only got 65,000 visits a month to those sites. We can give you 200,000 visits per month. Believe me, a Jewish organization having that type of relationship leads on to other possibilities. Now, that's not community versus community. That's politics. And I think that we have to think politically in terms of fighting anti-Semitism. Protest is important, but it's not just protest. It's also what I call political mortgages.
Last question.
I just want to make it really small enough that I can't believe I missed the whole event. But I just wanted to make it I'm really sorry that I missed all the event. I just wanted to make it really small enough that I just brought some copies of the Durban Diary. I'm just interning at the HAC in New York. And I just brought a report from someone who has been there in Durban in 2001. And it's quite interesting.
Okay. So
Just
who is it?
interested.
From AJC.
From Joel Fies?
Yeah, from the
Can I just suggest that, with the indulgence of Charles Smallhurst, who run off to a plane to a conference that I will be coming later to, that if anybody would like to stay in contact with me, you have my email, and I would be delighted to, if you have any specific questions pertaining to Europe or Latin America, particularly a burgeoning problem in Latin America, is the Tehran-Caracas axis, which, as you all know, is, I think, probably a very dangerous threat to the lower underbelly of the United States of America, and has not been addressed by the American administration.
So on behalf of ISA, not only do I want to thank you, but thank you for your important work that you're doing on Durban, which, I think as things unfold, is going to be significant with all sorts of ramifications that we should pay very close attention to. And also your work on Iran, South America, and other parts of the world is very important. So I encourage the researchers of ISA and everybody else to